Hello and welcome everyone to Where's My Robot with a Crystal Ball. My name is JP Ratajczak and I'll be the moderator for our event today. It is a joint webinar between the Special Library Association's Competitive Intelligence Community and the Council of CI Fellows. So quite the unique opportunity here. And if you're an information professional, if you're an intelligence analyst, if you're a leader, a futurist, a visionary, you're in the right place, because many times we thought that today we'd have robots not only scouring the headlines for us, but producing analysis. And we have an expert panel today of subject matter experts who are going to be talking about this topic to tell us how we bridge these topics of technology and foresight. Because for us as professionals, the topics go hand in hand. Foresight's not complete without a technological component, and technology is useless without the foresight of how to harness it. So we're going to dive into that here briefly, but a few housekeeping items before we do that. Because if you're new here, this webinar is just part of the content that the SLA Competitive Intelligence community produces. In addition to the ongoing webinar program, the CIC also has a worthwhile lineup of presentations coming up for the SLA annual conference, which hopefully you'll be able to join us for in July. As you'll see there. One other thing, I wanted to say thanks to Aurora WDC for sponsoring today's event. This webinar is being recorded, so tomorrow you will receive a recording of that, or a copy of the recording via email. And we encourage you today, use the chat throughout the session to add to the conversation, to ask questions of our panelists. Definitely want this to be an engaging, interactive experience. Going back to the conference really quick for SLA, as coming up July 31st to August 2nd. It's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the conference agenda is formatted to accommodate both in-person and on-demand virtual sessions. So you can register for the in-person attendance and also receive access to the virtual content. And if you register by June 1st, you can take advantage of early bird savings on that. And then also next month in May, we are planning to have the next CIC webinar. The good news is that if you are registered for today's event, you're already on the registration list for future installments of the webinar series throughout the year. And then one other event coming up, the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows has announced that the annual conference or annual summit titled Foresight Now will be happening September 14th to 15th. So you'll want to mark your calendars for that. Okay, over to our topic for today. Really quick, there will be a $25 gift card randomly given to one of today's attendees. And you can see just how valuable that is. Here's what one previous winner said about this webinar series. As we go forward, I encourage you also to use the hashtag CIC webinar to be carrying on the conversation online today. So with that, I think we've closed up the housekeeping. Let's get to the good parts of today's conversation. Because with me are three panelists. We have Julie Dawson, the Director of Regulatory and Policy at YOT. Welcome, Julie. We have Arik Johnson, who's the founder and chairman at Aurora WDC, and Christian Bjerser, who's the CEO at Commentelli. They will all quickly give us a quick introduction of their background and why exactly we should be listening to them for this conversation that we're going to be having today. So with that, Julie, I'll hand it over to you to give a quick introduction and perhaps what you're looking for participants in today's call to hear about and be listening for.
Thanks very much, JP, and a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Julie Dawson. I lead on regulatory and policy for a digital identity platform called YOT, Your Own Trusted Identity. Platform of over 11 million people that have set up a reusable digital ID, but also offering a range of other services to enable you as a citizen or a professional to prove who you are, how old you are, provide e-signatures, also augmented with identity verification and authentication. So one of the things that I look in my role is how can you as a consumer or an organization, an NGO or a government trust the tech that we're deploying? And one of the key things that the angles in my role is looking at the ethics of the deployment of our tech. So the human rights, consumer rights, the last mile tech, the accessibility, any online harms angles, the transparency, and basically looking at how can we explain what we're doing? Can we show that what we're doing is fair? Can we show that it's being developed and deployed in a way that respects diversity? So one of the things I think that's key for us as a business is looking downstream. How is our technology deployed and how does it fit into society? Hopefully that gives you a quick flavour of what we'll look at. I'm happy to pass on to the next. Thank you, JP.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. Christian, how about you go next?
Happy to, JP, and again, thank you for the invite. Well, a commentary, why should you listen to us? We've been in the business of doing CI systems since the late 90s. I've personally been working with CI all my professional life, basically straight out of university. Much of it has been focused on technology and creating sort of the systems that we work with today. We aim to bring a complete system to our users that takes care of sort of all the components of the CI process, from the stage of acquiring intelligence to make it into insights and intelligence that can be distributed. So that's kind of our mission. And I hope that this session today will bring a little bit more light to the area of technology and what it can do for you today, wherever you are. I mean, we have a lot of participants. It has to kind of translate what we're saying into their specific context, but also where you might be going tomorrow. So that's what I hope for today, at least. Arik?
We'll definitely dive into those topics. Yeah, and Arik, over to you.
Thank you, JP, and thank you, Christian and Julie. So nice to meet you. I'm really looking forward to our exchange here today. And my background is really not from an intelligence point of view. I describe myself as sort of an impersonating businessman who's really a historian at heart. And so a lot of my background is really why things went the way they did and what could have been done differently in order to produce a different result. So my motto the last couple of years has been no action, no traction, which is really speaking to the actionability problem with most intelligence. I'd say that's still a problem, is that most of the intelligence that is produced is never acted on. And that remains a problem, I think, reputationally for competitive intelligence people and how we figure out our relevant position in the world, particularly in the corporate world, where productivity is measured by results. And so, that's what I hope we take away from my remarks today. But I'm really in the fourth phase of my career. My career started out as kind of learning how to sell, learning how to market what we do. The second phase is really learning about competitive intelligence, which I did for 15 years as CEO at Aurora WDC, a job I very lovingly handed down to my kid brother, Derek, who is much, much better at it than I ever was about 10 years ago, and a little more than that actually now. And for the last about 10 years or so, I've been really working in the R&D lab part of what Aurora does. When the pandemic hit, that forced us to really recalibrate everything about the company and launch a few new things. So all of them technology based. So I'm eager to see if we touch on any of that today. Thanks, guys.
There's going to be a great confluence of backgrounds, of perspectives, of ideas that we have today. So again, if you have any questions, any thoughts for our panelists here, drop those in the chat panel that you see over there. Each one of you could easily speak on the topics of AI or automation or robots for well over an hour. So we'll try and keep this condensed a little bit. But before we get into hey, what's happening now and what can we expect in the future, let's take a quick trip down memory lane and talk about how do we get the idea for this particular topic. And I'll say that it was born out of a session from the last Council of CI Fellows Summit called, more simply, Where's My Robot Analyst? And that was a great discussion led by a panel that really looked into what some of those different insights, those automations, those technologies that we could look forward to in the future. And that's what we want to kind of carry that conversation on, talk a little bit more, because it's not only about having that automation, that robotic AI type technology available to us, the where's my robot part, but also where can we have that start to push us or help us or do a multitude of other things as we look to the future. As each of you were introducing yourselves, I don't think it was lost on anyone in the audience. By the way, we have over 300 people registered for today, so hundreds of people in the audience today. Not lost on anyone that you've been around, you've seen a lot of changes, and you've lived through some of these transitions and technological advancements. So maybe we could start off. Let's start out with you, Christian. If we think back maybe 10, 20 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about where we would be today in 2022, what were some of the advancements, some of the things that we were thinking about? Because obviously, we had some lofty visionaries, but sometimes those things don't always pan out. So thinking about where we were and where we thought we'd be today, how would you describe that?
I would sort of describe it as a journey into maturity when it comes to seeing what technology is actually capable of doing. If you look back at, I mean, you sent something out before this, where were we 10, 20, I even think you said 50 years ago. I'm not going to speak on the 50-year part. I'm going to sort of stay on the 10 or 20. Back in those days, when you saw AI coming out kind of as a very novel thing, it quickly raised, as probably it is in human nature, you see something new and shiny and you think it's going to be an immediate sort of payoff to you. I think that the expectations we had back then, if you look 10 and 20 years ago, were very, very high. I remember working on sort of my first introduction to this field of AI-driven software was working with autonomy, and how powerful that software were, and then getting to see how much effort it took to make it powerful, which was an eye-opener. So I think that there was this conception back in those days that you were going to be having that robot with the crystal ball, basically being able to ask a question, what is my strategy going to be for the next 10 years? And then get kind of a report out on that. And that might sound ridiculous today, but that was the mindset back then. It was immensely difficult to try to bring some sort of sanity into that discussion. So very, very high expectations, I would say, at that point.
Good to set the table for us. And let's, Julie, switch over to your perspective, because in a sea of voices that we've increasingly had to sift through, can you kind of walk us through maybe how we thought that might have evolved or changed to where we are? And then I promise we'll get into hey, where are we today and what can we look forward to in the future?
Quite right. There are a real sea of voices, and no matter what the platform is, be it an intelligence platform, be it platforms we might use in our everyday lives, we're trying to look at what can we trust. Can we trust everything that we read? Can we trust the sources? Has it been verified? And yet there's a flip side to that. Specifically in the US, the whole of the freedom of speech and the anonymity is also prized. So governments around the world are playing with these different tensions and dynamics. Should it be that everything that is published in every instance should always be verified and I should be stood there or the equivalent of my full identification provided? Or is there a hybrid to that? And that's where I think we're seeing technology come into play, to actually look at what is horses for courses, what's fit for purpose. And should that be a full verification? Should it be something pseudonymized? Or should it be something that just says this is a unique individual over a certain age? What is appropriate for the industry? What is appropriate for the purpose? But we're seeing a lot of things changes in this area. In our news world, and what all exist in that area as well, we don't want a chilling effect. We don't want to never read news from a troubled state around the world, but if that journalist doesn't have a way to write without putting their name, they could be in jail the next day, or killed, or other. We know that chilling effect does happen. And we also know that bots are being deployed in many different ways by bad actors. That could be to spread misinformation, it could be to specifically target and abuse an individual, a category of people, etc. So all of this is happening, and yet the flip side is the potential risk of the chilling effect. But the world has moved on, and many different technological nuances have developed in terms of tokenization, so that you can know that this is an individual over a certain age, or an individual linked to their identity, or linked to their banking credentials, linked to open banking, linked to maybe just a profile which is a hashed profile that can be almost in escrow held by a third party, so that you're trusting that individual has a verification. So I think we will start to see some of these nuances, which at the moment are coming up, for example, in the online safety bill in the UK, morph into other platforms. And I know one of the things in this forum you try to look at is what are the things happening in other parallel industries and parallel domains that could influence the future of your sector. So I would almost put that over to some of the others on the panel. Is there relevance to that? Do you think this element of verification is one that you see coming through already?
Arik, I know you want to say something.
Well, I think that's my cue. And so Julie, really, really great remarks. And I'll tell you that I think pseudonymity management is one of those problem sets, and I'll even call it an ecosystem unto itself that we're going to be grappling with in the decade ahead. And that's why I was so excited to meet you. I know JP and Christian for many, many years. We're old friends, but you're about to be one of my new best friends, I think, Julie, as we discover how to help each other with that. But absolutely true. I think we exist now in a zero trust environment where Web3 makes it possible for us to be permissionless with how we handle identity, and the identity of an anonymous, crypto wallet identified by a series of alphanumeric, string of numbers, and how that wallet is then federated to an actual human, and that human retains sovereignty over their identity. I personally find that to be the most exciting part of what the CI tech landscape holds for the future. In fact, we've been investing ourselves for about a year now in the NFT space, specifically. I was joking with Suki Fuller the other day. I couldn't spell NFT a year ago, and here we are. We've got our own sort of category of NFTs based on the proof of attendance protocol, or POAPs, that are used to prove that you attended something. So JP, maybe some POAPs should be distributed for the SLA CIC webinar series at some point in the future. But I think that whole nature of identity and pseudonymity and sovereignty, personal sovereignty over who you are, we saw sort of exposed just yesterday with the libs of TikTok doxing incident by the Washington Post. And whatever side of the political aisle you're on, I am a constitutional anarchist, by the way, so I can't stand any of them. But I do find it very, very unsettling that someone's sovereign identity can be unmasked so easily, and obviously repressed as a result. So great remarks, all of you, so far.
I've just put in the chat, JP, something that people might find of interesting, which is the Velocity Foundation Network, which is actually looking at how to avoid people lying on their CVs, so that you could know that I definitely received this qualification from this place, I worked at these places, and maybe I'm the nurse or a doctor with a white coat and stethoscope, and you feel more confident as I sit down to deal with you, or if you were to hire me in your practice. So they're looking across many, many different industries, many different countries, but this whole element also linked with tokenomics. of profiles, verified identities and attributes. As well as that, you've got trust frameworks evolving in many parts of the world that are bridging identity, but also with specific industry requirements, be that for land registry, be that for looking at right to work or right to rent or other sectors. So yeah, happy if people subsequently have an interest in those to pick up on that.
Good one to pass along. Thanks, Julie. So what I hear you all saying is that we have some issues that have come up that perhaps we didn't foresee, whether these are trust and verification issues, whether these are, you mentioned some chilling effects, whether it's just the technology not catching up. And is that what has led us to, Arik, what you mentioned earlier, the no action, no traction kind of quandary that we're in, where we've really, I guess, arrived at with our sense of, hey, where is this robot? Where's this automation that we're still looking for? Have those things kind of combined to make us arrive where we are at today?
Yeah, I think with regard to action, you'll have a hard time as a chief executive officer explaining to your board of directors why you acted on a recommendation from an AI and the fiduciary responsibility of the results of those actions. Notwithstanding, I think that's really the barrier. Is there's a governance barrier behind and between humans and the automation layer, and I think that's something we're going to spend a long time overcoming. I don't think that sort of governance problem or the abdication of governance to artificial intelligence is going to happen anytime soon. Now, in the run-up to this show, I shared that I look at the technologies that are really defining competitive intelligence in the future by the acronym DARK, distributed ledger, AI, mixed reality, and quantum. And as I look at my own portfolio of investments, and thanks, Derek, a lot for making me a portfolio manager when I think about my speculation on what will happen next, most of it's in the distributed ledger category. The notion that distributed ledgers will change how we make choices because of how you represent equity, your stake in the future, and how distributed ledgers change that, the tokenomics that Julie was just talking about. Frankly, mixed reality is probably, if distributed ledger is 60% of my portfolio, mixed reality is 30%. AI probably gets the bulk of the remainder, and I'd say quantum is around the corner. But in terms of how we think about investing in CI technology as providers or as users of that technology, it's really all about choice making. And first, in order to make a choice, you have to have more than one choice. And sacrificing all of the suboptimal choices that's the real art of competitive intelligence, is making all the choices available and then saying, these 99% are wrong for us, and here's why. Here's the one you have to choose and sacrifice the others.
So Christian, I want to hear your input here. So as an advocate of AI technology, that's one of the things that your company does. How does this idea of governance or the fact that AI can't be trusted by a board of directors, how do you address that? Is that truly where we're at?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we're at that point at all. And I think it's we might get there, but we're not there today. Like what I talked about previously, the expectation to have some sort of decision printed out or suggestion printed out from a machine. The consequences of that are interesting, because if you could do that, the analyst is no longer necessary as part of the process. So basically, you could just have the machine standing next to you, but it doesn't work. So at the level where we are today, I would say that we're at a situation where we are talking about more analyst support tools. So the AI is very useful in digesting large amount of data and trying to look for connections, trying to look for trends and themes going on in that data set. So it acts kind of like a fellow analyst with a pretty narrow sort of skill set that can point you and say, hey, look, JP, I found something here. You might want to take a look at it. So in that way, it is augmenting your capabilities. It's making you more effective. That's where we are today, but it's nowhere near making decisions or suggesting decisions. We could, of course, get there, but I think it's going to be very, very hard to achieve that state in the near future. I think that we're going to have to live with human intelligence for quite a while longer going forward.
Can you expand on what you think's holding us back, Christian?
Well, I think the algorithms themselves, of course, that's one thing. I also think it's also a question of something simple as the amount of data that we're looking for. And of course, if you narrow it down to decision-making situation that is pretty straightforward, should we establish operations in this area, and we have like a couple of criteria which we found that upon, then of course you could get a pretty good suggestion from the AI. But the more complex the environment becomes, the more data that is needed. If you look at the data that is used by a lot of our customers, to make an AI effective, many of them are not near that level of data to train an AI to make decisions and have that kind of skill set moving forward. So that's why we try to help them out in predefined AI functions that they can use. So to your point there, Arik, machines have to learn from someone, and that I think is one of the bottlenecks today. And practically, I mean, if you look at some companies like Netflix, just the amount of data that they need to recommend another movie to you the same way that, like, I like this movie, you probably like that one. It's a lot of data.
I like the point you're getting to about technology being another analyst tool, right? Not necessarily replacing the analyst right now. I'm wondering though, are there certain industries, are there certain applications that maybe as competitive intelligence professionals, kind of generalizing the audience here, that we can look to for inspiration? Is that, Julie, perhaps something like verification? Is that a great use of it? Are there others?
Whether it's a great use, I would not know, but I do think there's some very interesting uses that might intrigue people. So one of the uses that we've seen to have a huge amount of industry uptake is around an AI tool that we've built to assess age. So if you think over 30% of people on the planet using the internet are under the age of 18. And classically, you don't let your 5-year-old do all the things that you'd let an adult do. There are certain things in the offline world. However, in the online world, things have taken a bit longer. So in the same way as we didn't have car seats and traffic lights on day one, but we had the automobile. We've now got the internet, but we're having to build in a lot of the guardrails. So AI to estimate age has really come on a pace in the last couple of years, to the point that it can assess within 1.5 years of accuracy an age of a 6 to 24-year-old. And this is now posing lots of questions. So how can you do that in a way that is understandable by the demographic that will be using it? And there's been a gauntlet laid down by many different regulators, but also by UNICEF, to basically the UNICEF principles of explaining AI to children. And a really interesting thing that we found that is maybe counterintuitive is that actually the materials we developed to explain AI to children are the best ones to use with journalists, the best ones to use with regulators, and the best ones to use in anything that is outward facing, because it's written in plain English. If you can write something so that a 9 or 10-year-old can understand it, pretty much your whole demographic will be able to understand it. Things similarly then around the transparency and diversity, explaining what the bias was under the hood was really crucial if you're providing this type of a tool. So explaining it in plain English, providing transparency as to the mean absolute error levels, following principles, showing how the data set was derived, so the supply chain of the data set. And all of these things, I think, are ones that across the industry are being brought up more and more. Everyone has to look at the ethical underpinnings. So in the same way as a decade ago, people might have just bought junk food and not really worried about the heritage, or bought a garment and not really thought about it, where that data set has come from, and has it been collected according to GDPR, if it's in Europe, or other privacy approaches around the world, and can you actually explain it? And can you actually prove that the diversity and bias is equitable? And is the actual access to that also accessible with WCAG 2.1 AA standards to meet people around the world that might be using it? And I think all of those are perhaps interesting points, and maybe in your industries there are parallels of some of those constraints actually being a competitive advantage as organisations adapt them. Does that pose any linkages with your areas? Because we're in quite a different field. I see this as one which in the identity world is quite core at the moment, but I don't know how many parallels there are with the data sets that you guys are using.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, I think for 25 or so years now that human source intelligence networks have been probably the gnarliest information management problem that competitive intelligence professionals have had to cope with, build solutions for, and ultimately exploit, because the nature of human knowledge is mobile. You take that knowledge with you when you leave the organization, and the organization no longer has custody of your understanding of reality, your unique perspective on reality. And I think that's why HUMINT, we in the Intel world, Julie, call it HUMINT. And whenever we say HUMINT, we're referring to that human source, problem. When you tokenize that, when you make that knowledge available, but available anonymously to all but those with the keys, I think that presents opportunities for a longer range custody of that knowledge and the application of that knowledge as it changes over time. So one of my discussions with Craig Fleischer right now, our Chief Analytics Officer, is around timelines and how the past ultimately projects to the future based on who knew what and when. And so I think that's one of the frontier areas that we're ultimately going to see emerge. And of course, identity is at the center of that, or rather pseudonymity, I suppose.
I think that's interesting, Arik, because you see also that we have more tools now and we are better. Our technology is better, but it's also a question to see where is this human being transferred. And it's generally not within the CI system. It's generally done in Slack channels, on Teams and things like that. That's where you can find a lot of interesting things. So integrating, the integration of systems is definitely going to be very, we're seeing that massively coming, that all of these systems are basically sources for intelligence. And that of course comes into the ethics comes into play. I mean, do we eavesdrop on our coworkers to get the information? Are we allowed to do that? And then again, to your point, Julie, what about disinformation and things coming up like that? Who is saying this really? So there are a lot of these things that are coming up now that are not necessarily, I mean, it's not hard to get this information in. It's actually super easy, and it's also pretty easy to deal with it. But we also must make sure that are we acquiring it the right way, and is it the right information to acquire?
There's a whole different sidebar on ethics going on in the chat window right now. So it could be a totally different topic.
Have a CI discussion and ethics will come up every time.
Charlotte made a good point in there about, so Julie, you started talking about ethics and how bias and all that is considered, but also who has access to that information, and is that equitable, and is it concentrated in the hands of very few? So another kind of interesting topic maybe for an entirely different discussion there as well. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the past, how we've come to be where we are now, maybe what some of the shortcomings are, or where we're feeling a little bit frustrated in terms of where we thought we'd be. So what is it that we can start looking forward to a little bit more? So as a CI professional, if you have to go to your director, your CEO, whoever it is, and say, hey, look, we need to be watching out for this technology in the next 1, 2, 3 years. We need to get ahead of it now. What is that answer for you? Or what would you recommend folks be out there telling those overlords of ours?
I'll throw something out there, I guess, in response to that, JP. I think the problem I've noticed with the actionable part is that when you have a pre-existing set of assumptions about what you're going to do next, and you turn to intelligence for confirmation bias level data that will tell you that you are indeed the smartest person at the company and you know exactly what to do next, you will do exactly the wrong thing because you had your own answer already. And so for me, it's actually now a client qualification technique is I try and ask myself if there's anything this person, if there's anything I can tell this person they don't already know is the answer. Because if the answer is no, there's a very low yield opportunity for intelligence with someone that you can't expand their horizons for, because intelligence begins with discovery. It's about putting boundaries around the macro environment that you're trying to understand, because you want to expand the possible action options that are available to the decision maker. And then you narrow it, you optimize it for your specific offer or plan or strategy, but you have to expand it first before you optimize it. That's that sacrifice process. And then you have to figure out who's going to help or hinder you. And that's really, if you think about what it is, the key intelligence topics protocol is there for, the discovery part is really about early warning topics. What are the uncontrollables that we're going to have to cope with going forward? Optimality is really about the key decisions and issues that we're going to have to confront as an organization. How will we respond to that universe of possibilities? And then the final stage is really simulating what those responses will be from either friends or foes or indifferent stakeholders who see you up to something in their world. That's really the key players. So this is all old school doctrinaire, ripped out of the page of the CIA and adapted it, Motorola by Jan Herring stuff in the 80s. It's still the problem set. It's just poorly understood by most people unless you sort of pore over the literature like some of us intelligence nerds do.
But I think also the challenge now that we are actually in a unique position to address is actually that, and we talk about the decision makers. A colleague of mine, and you know him very well, Gabriel Anderbjörk, he used to state the question is, how many decision makers are there in your company? You have like 5,000 people in your company, and then you start, there's the CEO, and then there's this C-level person, and then they come up with 10 people or something like that, which the follow-up question will be, well, the rest of the 4,990 people are not decision makers. So where we are today is we are in a position to actually put intelligence tools in the hands of a lot of people in the companies and empowering them to make better decisions. And I think that with your sort of comment on action and traction, that's how you get traction for a CI unit in a company. You get it by not maybe focusing only on the absolute top management, but also giving the intelligence power to the rest of the company. That also sort of strengthens the position of CI in the company, makes it visible for a greater audience. So I think that, sorry, JP, I kind of lost track of the question, but I think what we're going to be on the lookout for coming up are technologies that help us do that helps us with the heavy lifting, that relieves the pressure of the analyst to serve everyone, because that's an impossibility, but putting more self-service systems in place. That also frees up time for the analyst to actually work in kind of the way that Arik describes on and serving the maybe the top management of the company, if you'd like to put it that way. So I'll be on the lookout for that kind of technology.
So when we're talking about the robot analyst, and being facetious with that choice of words,
you might not get the exact quality, but I mean, you sometimes good enough is good enough.
Yeah. And not to call the calling of information or processing of that a low level task necessarily, but it's one that's repeatable and manual. And that's where you're saying we're going to be able to get some of those gains from.
Yeah.
Julie, you were going to say something?
It's again a parallel area, but if you looked at some of our regulators now, they're actually starting to see how they can employ AI in the regulatory function. So if you look in the UK at the gambling regulator, they're looking at how can they create avatars rather than having 13-year-olds trying to buy booze or gamble, which they don't think is hugely ethical. And you're starting to see also a German regulator look at all the platforms that they're regulating and look at activity. And we saw from the Francis Hogan testimony, the Facebook whistleblower, it's a tongue twister, an advocacy around open data and enabling more organisations, non-profits, NGOs, as well as employees, as well as staff within a company, understand the metrics and what's going on within some of those platforms. And I think this combination of be it regulators, be it NGOs, be it staff, be they whistleblowing or not, is going to create another army of people, be they avatars or not, that otherwise could be looking at doing some of the things that the official CI unit should be doing unofficially. I don't know if you watched much of that Facebook testimony from Francis Hogan, but for example, in our area, one of the things that she disclosed was all those platforms were already able to judge the age of users within a year of accuracy, which had never been publicly disclosed. We don't know if that has been corroborated. However, it educated a huge amount of regulators and made people think, what is the data in there and how could that metadata and data be harnessed to see how that platform is operating? There'll be people internally that would like to do that better, and there'll be people externally that would like to do that better. So that was just the sparks that came to me from your discussions there.
I had a question come in. Thanks, Joy. And continuing that conversation about information and sources and regulation. Arik, I'm going to turn this one back over to you since you're the one who brought it up. Can we turn for a moment to the person posting objectionable material and how they were unmasked? Why is that a problem? If we really care about sources of information, then we should care about who is behind a post. What's missing there?
Depends on your definition of objectionable, I think, and the subjective nature of quality control when it comes to the poster. In whose eyes is something objectionable, or is it a depiction of their perspective on actual reality? Obviously, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, information designed to cause harm, in other words, is a big problem. I think maybe it's the wicked problem of our era. I see my children as sort of Gen Zers having to figure this out. And I'll tell you that the right way to approach it is you don't trust anything that you see or read or hear. And I think that's what ultimately need to be in place is we have a zero trust environment. And you don't need permission to engage with unknown entities who are able to prove that they've got credentials based upon the contents of their the tokens in their wallet, so to speak. Back to that sort of topic we talked about earlier, POAPs are one NFT method of doing that. There's a bunch of other ways to represent your experience and represent your experience pseudonymously so that you aren't unmasked necessarily, but the evidence is there. At the end of it, the evidence is irreproducible. You can't, I'm searching for the right word. It can't be counterfeited. You can't counterfeit tokens on a blockchain. It can't be done. That's the whole point. And so it doesn't matter who you are when you're speaking like that. And so I guess my final dismount from the answer would be, we're going to have a lot of those pseudonymous perspectives shared, and it's up to you whether or not you value them and incorporate them into your overall analysis and the weighting of degree to which you do incorporate them.
Maybe just picking up on that, though, one of the things that's proposed in our online safety bill in the UK is that citizens will have the choice to only engage with verified individuals. So say
Right.
you're a sports person and you've just had a year and a half of toxic, whatever on your feeds, you might be tempted to do that. You might say, well, I'm happy to go into this bubble. I just don't want to engage with that. There's probably some of the percentages that are still happy to say directly what they wanted to say previously, but others won't. Do you think that that would have an impact?
That's sovereignty. You're decentralizing to the individual, and you're able to make sovereign choices over who you wish to engage with, and there's no intermediary who's going to tell you can't. I think that's ultimately, what open source is all about, is that, we know that we're operating in the Wild West, and that the rules of engagement are clearly understood by all participants. I think that's true of Gen Z today. I think Gen Z understands that to be the current reality, and they act accordingly. I really do. I think that my children understand what a deep fake is, and how a deep fake can mislead them, and they don't trust anything that they see online, and that's not a bad thing. That trust but verify. I think it was Craig who put in the chat a little while ago. The degree of trust that you give someone is based on their ability to earn it. They're going to have to earn your trust in order for you to give it to them, which is good.
Seems to be a particularly thorny issue if we get to the point where we're trusting automation to help us make decisions, and that is how we go back and walk that proof point into a way that's easy to understand or explain.
Yeah.
Christian, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say this is difficult. I mean, the question of getting, anyone who's just looking at how an AI could act on this kind of misinformation that goes on on Twitter and all that, and produce something out of it could be quite staggering. So again, from our perspective, it's also a question of where you get your sources. Do you engage? Do you pull in an entire Twitter feed into your intelligence system? Probably not a very good idea. So you have to be kind of conscious of what you put into your machine, basically, to see what you get out of there. As well. For example, AI is really not very good with irony, for example. So saying that, yeah, this is a really good webinar, will be interpreted as this is a really good webinar. So yeah, but everyone who heard me say it, obviously that was not the case that I was trying to put forward. So yeah, I'm kind of, from my perspective, social media in particular, I'm a bit iffy about what to pull into a CI system there. Be very, very, very careful.
Is that still going to be a problem?
Yes.
Is that irony?
I don't know. You tell me.
I would have to agree with you. Arik, what do you think?
Sorry, I was chatting. I missed it. Christian, forgive me. I knew you'd call on me when I wasn't paying attention, JP.
It wasn't me who called on you. It was JP who called on you.
All right. On the problem of having verification applied in the future, right? So is this an issue that's going to go away? Are things like irony, for example, which can be misinterpreted, is that going to continue to plague us? Is AI maybe just not ready, or will it ever be ready, do we think?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I don't know. I think is my answer to that, JP. And by the way, that's the best answer a competitive intelligence analyst can ever give when asked a question is, I don't know, but I think I can figure it out. And I think I know where the answer lies. And I think the answer ultimately lies in the motives of your stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders that are involved in whatever issue you're trying to tackle? And if it's an issue for them, they have an interest, an incentive in figuring it out. And I think that'll ultimately be part of that landscape. And I'll say that About 6 years ago, I was sitting in the audience at the Shanghai Library listening to a lecture on artificial intelligence from a Chinese researcher. And the guy next to me said, he was a Chinese guy living in Florida, and I'm obviously an American dude. And he didn't know whether I spoke Chinese or not. I understand a little Chinese, enough to be dangerous. But he said, "Did you just hear that?" And I said, "No, what was it?" He had the headphones on. He was listening to the English translation, and he said, "They gave you a different Americanized answer than they put through the headphones than what they told the Chinese people in the room." I said, "Well, tell me more about that. I need to know more about that." And it was all around the notion of generalized artificial intelligence. So if there is a general AI that can launch a rocket, wash your clothes, teach your children, that sort of thing, that's sort of been the China strategy for artificial intelligence versus the Western strategy being very sort of point solution driven. And I think that that's simply based on how we allocate capital, in the West. In China, everything's a 5-year plan, and there's large concentrations of power and stake that ultimately govern where investments happen. And, that's a bet the ranch kind of strategy. The general AI, should it ever come to pass, which I don't think it will, by the way. And I only know that because another very smart person I know did a study looking at the trends of engineering system evolution on artificial intelligence, and it lacks true creativity. True creativity is not something that a machine can reproduce. And it's that creativity ultimately that makes us human. So I don't know. I don't know the answer, JP, and that's a really long way of saying I don't know, but I will tell you, intelligence and strategy are creative pursuits. This is not a technical discipline. This is about whether or not you have imagination. Can you imagine a future where something that is true needs other factors to be true in order for that to happen? And that's how to make sense of the world. How to sort of recalibrate your logic for this ultra complex world and ambiguous world we live in. I now refer to what we do not as competitive intelligence, but as the ambiguous sciences.
There's a lot there to unpack there, Arik. And we have a few more minutes left. So here's what I suggest. The topic of creativity, of the need for innovation, something not being capable necessarily, or at least applicable to a robot trying to do our jobs necessarily, I think is a good one, one that would go a little bit longer. But before we close up today, we got a few more minutes. I want to thank everyone in the chat for having discussions, online for posting, keeping that conversation going. I want to say thanks to Julie, to Christian, to Arik for all of your insights. We've covered so many topics here. We've covered everything from pseudonyms to verification to creativity, you name it. So we've got a few more minutes left. I'd love to hear some parting thoughts. What is your one big takeaway? Perhaps maybe what's something that we should be looking forward to in the future, something you're gonna be listening about. Just take like a minute or so. We'll go around the horn here, wrap it up. And Julie, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Just reading one of the points in the chat and wanting to pick up on that, it was who will guard the guardians or trust the trustees? So one of the things that I try and do is work with our external guardians council that hold us to account, so minutes published openly, terms of reference published openly, and have them as a sounding board. And then inside the company also have people from every team that I can pull together and throw around a thorny issue. So it could be, how might a government want to potentially avail of our age technology, and maybe that could be a government that is looking at age assessing 18-year-olds. Maybe it wants under 18s to be child soldiers, maybe it wants over 18s to be adult soldiers, but either of those might be something we might not want to see in the headlines. Versus an age assessment maybe to assess the age of victims and perpetrators on CSAM material. But actually having those bodies internally and externally to review the positive and negative intended and unintended consequences is something that I find a huge support, because it's not just one person in a company trying to think through all of those ramifications. So you have to look at it a bit like a Rubik's Cube. There's always positives and negatives. There's never one binary answer, but frequently you come out with a better mitigation after that sort of a review than you would have done on on your own or just as a management team. So that is one of the things in terms of how do you build trust with consumers, businesses, organizations, governments. I put the link into that Edelman Trust Index. I think it's thinking continually, how do you keep hold of that trust? Thank you.
Absolutely. Christian, how about you?
Well, I think there's during these kind of really exciting webinars, we tend to focus a lot about problems and issues and shortcomings of everything. So I kind of want to take a step back from that and say that I think that what everyone should do and take out of this is that this is just what we've been doing. We've been problematizing on a very high level. Take a step back, look what's your current situation, and assess what kind of technology can help you right now. We may not need to go to the extremes that we talked about here. It might be something that helps with the heavy lifting. I mean, an AI can do a lot of things more than the things we talked about here. So I think that it's, if I were to take something out of this discussion, is that it's great to have it on this level, but it's also good to go back and look at where am I right now, and what can help me move forward, and then have this. Of course, the vision for the future is always good, but look at where you are right now and see what can help you.
Positive outlook will get us much farther. Exactly. Thank you. And Arik.
Well, I'll just double down on what Christian just said about the practical and the pragmatic. I think that's what we've seen in the last decade or so, is that intelligence has moved into what would, in a prior age, have been derisively referred to as a tactical role. Why has it been moved into a tactical role? Because money talks and BS walks. That's why. And because we're in business to make money, and money's about converting customers, retaining customers, taking over new markets, expanding businesses, et cetera. And what Christian just alluded to is there is a huge dearth of people in the corporate world who have no understanding that competitive market and strategic intelligence is something that even can be done. So I think it's the reason why you see a lot of the growth in the CI world has been around sort of these, tactical but sort of product marketing support types of applications, which are driven at producing results based on action. So back to sort of where I started our conversation, at least, no action, no traction, and nothing happens till somebody sells something. And ultimately, I think that's where you're going to see some immediate benefits from applying competitive intelligence technology in the enterprise. And once you've, as I think I saw our good buddy Ed Allison's in the audience today. Hey, Ed, I miss you. And one of the things that Ed loves to say is, you do the tactical part so you earn the right to be strategic. And I think that's still a pretty wise statement.
Well, let's close this out with some tactical things first here. Again, the webinar has been recorded, so watch for an email tomorrow with a link to watch this again and see all those things that you didn't maybe catch on the first time. You also find all the webinars from the competitive intelligence community on the CIC's YouTube channel there as well. And one member of the audience also will be randomly selected to win a $25 gift card. So you will receive an email from us if that is you. So thank you again to everyone in the audience for joining us, everyone who's watching this asynchronously later on YouTube. Thank you to our panelists. Your inputs, your perspectives were invaluable today. Thanks. Have a great rest of the day.